The Christian life is one of movement, from A to B, from this to that. Our first reading from Jeremiah describes the exile of God's people. The Lord has delivered his people, the prophet writes, and he will gather all of them, the blind, the lame, the mothers, the children. He will gather them all together and bring them home. They left in tears, but they will return and be consoled. They left their land blind to what God was doing and how God would be active in their exile. But now they are brought back to where they can see and know God's presence amidst them. And our gospel today depicts movement as well. We have the movement of Jesus leaving from Jericho to travel with his disciples towards Jerusalem. It was not a solitary journey. Jesus was with his disciples and a sizable crowd, so one could imagine it was a bit of a commotion. We also know that this was not the first time Jesus made this journey, not the first time he traveled from Jericho to Jerusalem. So it is quite likely that Jesus passed by Bartimaeus previously, and Bartimaeus did not recognize Jesus. Have you ever thought that we too, you and I, have been very much like Bartimaeus at various times in our life? Yes, for most of us, we aren't physically blind, but we are all blind in so many ways. Blind to the world around us, blind to the needs of others, to the deep desires of our heart, to the presence of Christ in our midst. In a literal way, Bartimaeus moves from blindness to sight through the healing powers of Christ. He also moves from the blindness of not recognizing Jesus on previous trips down this road to now recognizing him. He moves in this instance from being unknown and being just a face in the crowd to now being recognized, called, and identified. He moves from darkness to light, from stationary, sitting by the roadside and begging, to following Jesus on the way. And so, often, we have each been like Bartimaeus. He had likely been sitting on this road when Jesus passed by previously. He had been in the presence of Jesus, but did not recognize it. He was blind to the ways God appeared before him. It was only on this last trip that Bartimaeus sees Jesus and calls out towards him. Sound familiar? We have certainly been blind to or ignored the presence of Jesus in our midst. We've been spiritually blind as Jesus passes close to us. Perhaps we ignored that invitation to a retreat we wanted to attend, but it was just a little too inconvenient. Perhaps we didn't recognize the ways in which Jesus drew near to us in a personal illness, the struggles of a relationship, or the death of a loved one. Maybe we chalked a fortuitous event or the near miss of an accident up to luck, rather than God's providence and presence in our life. Surely we can all recall a situation in which we've been blind like Bartimaeus was in this way. He's sitting alongside the road, and this time he does know it is Jesus, so he calls out to him. But he is rebuked and told to be quiet. But, Mark writes, he kept calling out all the more. And so Jesus calls out to him. Bartimaeus goes from being a face and a voice in the crowd to now drawing Jesus' attention. Have you ever experienced this? Being told to quiet down, being dismissed, moving from being unknown to known, from anonymous to now the center of attention in the direction of someone's care and love. Maybe we don't recognize these moments as being called out of a crowd by Jesus, but in these moments we are known, we are loved, we are cared for. Bartimaeus sits along that road in the uncertainty of life, in the frustration of human frailty, in the darkness of his condition, and Jesus asks him, "What do you want me to do for you?" Knowing himself well in the condition he is in, Bartimaeus declares with certainty, "Master, I want to see." As evidenced here and in the first reading when Jeremiah mentions the lame and the weak, Jesus calls all people, regardless of how society values them. Jesus calls them to the splendor of his life and his light. Each of us has experienced this at least once, but we might not remember it because we were infants. We've experienced it in our baptism. But perhaps we've experienced it in conversation with friends, in moments of prayer, or through the sacrament of reconciliation. Surely we can all recall a moment when we were brought from darkness to light, like Bartimaeus was in this way. He goes from sitting along this roadside and begging to following Jesus on the way. This is perhaps the most important note of Bartimaeus' story. How easy it would have been for Bartimaeus to have gone about life as he imagined it once he was healed, to have picked his things up, celebrated, and lived the life his society suggests. But he doesn't. Jesus tells Bartimaeus, "Go your way. Your faith has saved you." Your way. Jesus doesn't command Bartimaeus to follow him like he commands others in other stories. Jesus heals Bartimaeus and sends him on his way. But Bartimaeus immediately regains his sight, and rather than pursuing his way, Bartimaeus follows Jesus on the way. He goes from his stationary spot as a beggar to following Jesus on the way as a disciple. This, my friends, is the invitation of our faith and the good news of today's gospel. Jesus invites each of us throughout our lives to move from our stationary spot, which can often focus solely on ourselves. Jesus invites us to the dynamic life of mission in him. He invites us to the way, to the life of Christ. We may not be physically blind like Bartimaeus, but surely we harbor some blindness. Through prayer and God's grace, our proverbial eyes can be opened, such that we join Bartimaeus and countless others on the way, following Jesus.